Welcome to this webinar, very important conversation about the day after in Gaza. Now, obviously, we're not done and we don't know how this war is going to end, but this is a very important conversation. Before I get to that, a little bit about what we're doing here. This webinar and last week's webinar and the upcoming webinars we're going to do in this ongoing series are sponsored by Israel 365, which is an organization, a media company, and a pro-Israel organization that does lots of work connecting Jews and Christians all over the world to Israel. But more importantly, these events are sponsored by two movements that have come out of Israel 365. One is called Keep God's Land. Keep God's Land began immediately after October 7th. It is a movement of Christians and Jews supporting the state of Israel, specifically combating the calls for a two-state solution, for the division of the land of Israel, combating the calls for a Palestinian state. Immediately after October 7th, we started hearing calls from the State Department and from others that the response to all of this is to divide up God's land. So we sprung into action, and we quickly pulled together many of the leading figures in the Christian world with many Jewish leaders, hundreds of leaders, and we formed a coalition called Keep God's Land. And we have been we've been messaging and educating people about the disaster of this concept of the two-state solution, and applying political pressure as needed to raise the issue of the sovereignty of the Jewish people over the land of Israel. And you can go to keepgodsland.com and you can learn a lot more about that movement. And the second movement is called One Jewish State. Now, One Jewish State is a new slate that is going to be running in the World Zionist Congress. Now, One Jewish State is also, of course, the name of the upcoming book, the new book. I think it's being released as we speak. It's being released these days. And it's the new book by Ambassador David Friedman, who was one of our panelists tonight. And Ambassador Friedman, as you'll hear more about this later, puts forward an inspiring and important vision, and a realistic vision, a vision for Jewish sovereignty over the entirety of the land of Israel that also it takes care of, in the best possible way, it takes care of the Arab population as well. So many of us realize that the two-state solution and two-state solution thinking, the framework of that thinking, has been so much of the problem that we're up against. And Ambassador Friedman laid out a comprehensive vision in this upcoming book for a one-state solution, essentially one Jewish state. And his vision led us at Israel 365 to the conclusion that we need to, while it's good to get Christian leadership together speaking on behalf of Israel, we also need to get our own Jewish house in order. And we decided to take this vision and run a slate in the upcoming World Zionist Congress elections that are taking place this March. The World Zionist Congress, the World Zionist Organization, which allocates approximately $1 billion of Jewish communal funds to all kinds of projects in Israel and around the world, almost gives no money to the communities in Judea and Samaria. And we are going to change that. So we are running a slate in the World Zionist Congress elections called One Jewish State, based on the vision of Ambassador David Friedman. We're building a movement, which is a movement of a proud Zionism, a Zionism that believes in Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel, and believes in an education of the Jewish community worldwide that is proud. We see the results of where Jewish education has led when we see that younger Jews throughout the world, unfortunately, according to polling, are less supportive of Israel than their parents' generation, and this has to be changed. So One Jewish State is a movement, again, based on the vision laid out by Ambassador Friedman, that will express itself in the coming months in a campaign to win seats in the World Zionist Congress elections this coming March, so that we can actually start having a seat at the table and turn this Zionist ship around. So that's a little bit about who we are and who's doing these webinars. We're going to be doing many more of them in the coming months. They might not be every single week like they've been the last 2 weeks, as I said at the beginning, but we're so honored that you all joined us here. And that's just a little bit about who's behind all this. You can learn more about us. If you go to onejstate.com, you'll learn more about what we're doing at One Jewish State in terms of the World Zionist Congress elections. And there, if you're Jewish, you can apply to be a delegate. And we still are looking for delegates. We have about 300 delegates now. I think we need another 150 or so more that we'd like to recruit. And we'd like you to join this movement so that we can change the face of Zionism. This is the real response to October 7th. On our webinar tonight, we have, I believe, the three top people in terms of thinking about this question, about what does it actually look like the day after. We all know that a two-state solution is folly and that a Palestinian state would be a disaster and it would give victory to our enemies. But for so many of us, we haven't really thought about what is our solution. What is a good way forward? What should the land of Israel and our relationship with those who are not part of the Jewish people who live here, with our Arab neighbors, what should it look like going forward? So many of us are at a loss about what a good solution is. And I cannot think of any people in the world who have thought, written, and explained and shared a positive and effective visions on this topic any more than our three panelists tonight: Ambassador David Friedman, Dr. Mordechai Kedar, and Caroline Glick. The format that we're going to use will be the same as last week, where each of the panelists will speak for 10 minutes. And after that, there will be some conversation. If you have questions, please put them. If you want to ask a question, we're not going to have open questioning, but please put questions as a chat directly to me. And then whatever time we have for questions after the panelists have spoken, hopefully we'll have time for a few questions. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I doubt that we'll have time for everyone's questions because we do want to be done at the top of the hour. So I'd like to start with Dr. Kedar. Dr. Mordechai Kedar is an Israeli scholar of Arab culture and a lecturer at Bar Ilan University and the vice president of Newsreel, which is an Israeli news website and media company. He served for 25 years in IDF military intelligence, specializing in Syria and Arab political discourse, Arab mass media, Islamic groups, and Israeli Arabs. And he is an expert on the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist groups. And this introduction does not do him justice. He's really one of the thought leaders in the more nationalist side of the Israeli political spectrum. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Mordechai Kedar.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Volitsky, and I thank the audience as well. In order to understand the solution which I propose, we have to leave what we know and believe as Westerners and try to understand the Middle East, which is different culture. The Middle East is roughly divided to two kinds of states. One kind is the failing states, and the other kind is the successful states. The failing states are Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, potentially Algeria as well. These are more or less the failing states. The successful states are Kuwait, Qatar, 7 Emirates united in the Federation of the United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. One would ask what makes the successful states successful and the failures failures. The immediate answer would be oil. And the God, there is oil, so they are successful. But it is wrong. Iraq is an oil producing country, and it's a failing state. Same with Libya, which is a big oil production country, yet a failing state. On the contrary, Dubai is a very successful state, while it has no oil and no gas. Maybe 1 or 2% of the GDP of Dubai is connected to oil and gas. So if oil was the reason, Iraq and Libya would be heaven on earth, while Dubai would be a hell on earth. But the situation is totally opposite. So what is the reason for the success of the Gulf states? The reason is sociology. The failing states, all of them, are conglomerates of clans, ethnic groups like Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, Berbers in North Africa, religious groups, Muslims, Christians, Yazidis, Druze, Alawis, and many others, and sectarian groups, Sunnah, Shia, Salafis, Sufis, and all kinds of others. The state, the modern state, Iraq, Syria, and so forth, failed to galvanize the people to be one nation. They are all citizens, but not one nation. They don't get married with each other. They hate each other. They fight each other because of difference in clans, ethnic groups like Kurds and Arabs, and so forth. While the successful states are homogeneous. Kuwait belongs to one family, which is called Al-Sabah. Al is a clan. Al-Sabah is Kuwait. Qatar belongs to Al-Thani. Dubai belongs to Al Maktoum. Abu Dhabi belongs to Al Nahyan. And Saudi Arabia belongs to Al Saud. Therefore, when you base a state on one consolidated group, traditional group, you get a successful state with oil or without oil. While if the sociology of the society of a state is a multiple groups which never lived in peace with each other, the state is failing after it was a dictatorship because it has to impose itself on all the groups. And this is actually the Arab world in a nutshell. What I advocate is a solution, the Emirate solution, the only paradigm which works in the Middle East, to establish an emirate in Jericho for the Arikat clan, which live only in Jericho, another clan and another state, another emirate in Ramallah for the Barghoutis, another one in the Arab part of Hebron for the clans of Hebron, the Jabris, Kawasme, Nachet, Tamimi, Abu Snena. They have a court which deals with all the problems if they have. Another emirate in Shechem, Nablus, another one for the three clans of Nablus, Masri, Tukan, and Shaka, another emirate in Tulkarem for the Karmis, another one in Kalkilia, another in Jenin. While Israel should forever annex the rural areas of Judea and Samaria, offer Israeli citizenship to the villagers, which is not a demographic problem. There are more or less 15% of the population, while Israel keeps like 85 or almost 90% of the land, including the Jordan Valley, which is vital for Israel. And this is the only solution which corresponds with sociology, will give the so-called Palestinians, will give them independence, or to most of them, will give them their own rule over their own cities by the clans, not PLO and not Hamas. Because PLO is a terror organization which sponsors terror, which operates a terror organization like Shuhada al-Aqsa. And the PA actually produces this map, which, and this is the Palestinian flag, which from the river to the sea. And they're just like Hamas. Hamas would slaughter us in the name of Islam, while the PLO will slaughter us in the name of nationalism. This is why no PLO and no Hamas, only the clans, which are there forever. They are there for who knows how many hundreds of years, and they are the only legitimate rule which we can rely on, because they are against the jihadists, because the jihadists are willing to shake the boat, while the families, the clans, want to keep everything stable, economy, good life, and let Israel live side by side with them. This is the only solution to emulate the Emirate paradigm. And by the way, this is why the Emirates have good peace with Israel, an all-out peace with Israel, because they don't need Israel as an enemy to galvanize them under an aegis of illegitimate ruler. No, they are legitimate states. everyone is like a nation state of the clan. And this is why they don't look for enemies and they have no problem with Israel. While Syria and all the others have war with Israel in order to frighten their own people, leave all the differences and unite under the illegitimate aegis of Assad or Saddam Hussein or whoever was, in order to push out all the differences between the clans, between the ethnic groups, religious and sectarian groups. And this is actually the only solution which has prospects of success in the Middle East, because this is the only thing which corresponds with the culture of the Middle East, and not according to what all kinds of dreamers from the West who dreamt about democracy in the Middle East, which the Middle East actually rejects democracy, because democracy is women's rights, gays and lesbians' rights, freedom of religion, freedom from religion, things which are totally unacceptable in the Middle East. This is why only the paradigm which works in the Middle East, the Emirates solution, can be implemented and should be implemented if we want to reach any kind of peace between us and our neighbors.
Okay, Dr. Kedar, thank you. That was wonderful. This is if you could just add a couple minutes about the Gaza Strip. You talk about these clans and these emirates. What does that look like? Please mute yourself. There's someone here who is unmuted. I don't want to. William, please mute yourself. But Dr. Kedar, if you could just speak to the Gaza Strip. You spoke about the different clans. How many clans are we talking about there, and what might it look like in the Gaza Strip?
Until the war, I took the situation and I claimed that Gaza should be considered as a state under Hamas. Hamas should be really, not theoretically, really should be deterred, and let them live in this compound which they have in Gaza. Now, since Hamas is more than clear that nobody can live alongside with Hamas, Hamas should be totally destroyed. And we don't want the PA to be there, because the PA is a terrorist organization as well. So the clan system is the only thing. Assuming that the people of Gaza will return to the places which they were living until the war, they can establish 5 emirates. Why 5? Ever since the Egyptian rule in Gaza, before the 6-day war of 1967, Gaza is divided to 5 districts, administrative division. From the north to the south, Bet Lahiya, Beit Hanun is the first district in the north, near Ashkelon. Then another district is the city of Gaza. To the south is Dir el-Balach. To the south from it is Khan Yunis. And to the south, adjacent to the borders with Egypt, is Rafah. These are the 5 districts of Gaza Strip. This division was made according to the clans. They tried not to cut clans in the middle, the Egyptians already. Therefore, we can establish 5 emirates based in each and every one will be based on the local clans which live in this emirate. This is the same idea implemented on Gaza Strip as well. This is the ideal solution, and the solution which Israel should have tried to implement on the ground. Yet Hamas is totally against it, because Hamas know that the clan system is the only alternative. So when some families tried to distribute the humanitarian aid, they were targeted by Hamas, because the Hamas people know that this is the real alternative. So definitely we have to fight Hamas until they have no way how to influence the issues in Gaza, and then we have to delegate the rule of Gaza to the clans.
Thank you, Dr. Kedar. Taking into account the culture of the Middle East is something that, as you say, unfortunately, the Western mind has not gotten its head around. Even the whole idea of states and borders is a newfangled concept in the Middle East, and you're really bringing an important piece of clarity to the whole conversation.
And you know what, if I may add,
Sure.
the British established Iraq in the 20s, as of the 20s of the last century, and in the 40s they understood that this was a mistake when they saw this failing state. So when they got out of the Gulf during the 60s into the 70s, they left clannish Emirates behind them, because the British are learning from their mistakes. Unfortunately, those from behind the Atlantic, they don't learn from their mistakes, and you can see them making mistakes time after another. After they failed in Iraq, they failed in Afghanistan by the same mistake, thinking that if you bring money to people and you give them democracy, they will hug and kiss each other and forget all these clannish problems, which definitely are still alive and kicking in these countries, if not also alive and killing. And this is the mistake. Now we have to do the Emirate solution here in order to have some peace, which has all the prospects to be a very long time and stable.
Thank you. All right, we're going to call on our second panelist now. Caroline Glick is the senior contributing editor of the Jewish News Syndicate and host of the Caroline Glick Show on JNS. She's also the diplomatic commentator for Israel's Channel 14, as well as a columnist for Newsweek. Caroline is a senior fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Center for Security Policy in Washington and a lecturer at Israel's College of Statesmanship. She appears regularly on news outlets, major news outlets all over the world. I'm not going to go down the whole laundry list of them, but we all know who Caroline is. She is, in my opinion, the most consequential journalist in the English language in Israel, and I don't think there's even a question about that. She's the author of The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East, as well as other books, but that one is obviously quite relevant to this conversation. Caroline, we're honored to have you join us. The floor is yours. Caroline? Is Caroline?
I'm muted. Okay. No.
Hi.
All right.
How you doing?
Thank you very much, Rabbi, for those kind remarks. And thank you all for participating in this important webinar. I'll just say briefly that initially I had understood the question that I was supposed to respond to is what happens the day after Gaza. And I was going to offer some thoughts about that. And so what I'll do is I'll abbreviate my thoughts about Gaza and move into more general. But since I think it's important to point them out, look, I think it's been mentioned by many specialists on the Arab world and on Israel's strategic predicament that the only way that you can convince the Arabs that they've lost a war is to take land from them. And in this case, it's not taking some colony somewhere else. It's part of the land of Israel that we unilaterally walked away from idiotically. I think it's been proven in 2005 with the delusion that if we go away, then they won't have any rationale for fighting us any longer. It was the same rationale we had when we left Lebanon in 2000 unilaterally and just handed the entire country over lock, stock, and barrel to Hezbollah and Iran, thinking that they were only going to attack us because we were there, which was never true, but it was something that our deluded left, which was in charge at both times, had convinced itself of, and through the media here had convinced us large enough proportion of the public in order to force it down the throat of everybody with common sense. At any rate, what we found is that the only way that we can pacify Gaza and ensure that we achieve the goals of this war, which are not only to defeat Hamas, to destroy their regime, but also to prevent Gaza from posing a threat to us in the future, is by annexing large swaths of Gaza. We have to take over northern Gaza, and we have to settle it. And we have to take over the border zone with Egypt, and we have to settle it. And we have to take over a perimeter that's significant, whose depth is significant enough to block any movement from west to east into the border communities that were overrun and into southern Israel in general ever again. And that can be anywhere from 3 to 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, whatever it is. But that's the way to actually prove to the Palestinians and everybody watching beyond any doubt that Israel is one. Now, is that a viable option today? Not with the Biden-Harris administration in office, it's not. And so we've scaled back our aspirations and our war goals to try to be something that's minimally acceptable to the Americans that enables us to survive as a nation. And here we have to understand that it's simply true that if we don't win this war, we will place ourselves in even greater threat to our survival, because what we saw on October 7th was a taste of what they all want to accomplish here. And we simply can't allow that to happen. And so the minimal way of doing this is to have permanent Israeli security control over the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border zone with Egypt. It's 14 kilometers long from east to west. And that has to be under sole Israeli security control. And I dare say all of Gaza has to be under sole Israeli security control. So that's what we're looking at right now. And obviously, it's an ongoing, very unproductive discussion with the Biden administration, which has been suing for an Israeli defeat in this war since day one. But that would be the minimal goal. And as to the entire territory, look, I think I wrote my book, The Israeli Solution, back in 2013. And at the time, there was a lot of optimism in the sense that the Arabs of the land of Israel, both in Judea and Samaria and in Israel itself, among our Arab citizens, their response to the rise of Islamist forces in Egypt and the civil war in Syria in particular made them begin to view Israel as the safest port in the storm. And there was an integrationist pulse that was rushing through Israeli Arab society. You had increasing number of Israeli Arab parents sending their children to Hebrew language rather than Arabic language schools and matriculating into universities in Israel rather than in Jordan, which had been their practice. You had increasing levels of participation and desire to participate in national service and even in military service, not only among Israeli Arabs who were Christian, but also among Israeli Muslims. So these were all new things, and they led me to think that if given the choice between integrating them into Israel's citizenry or giving them a state, that the safer bet for Israel under all circumstances is to integrate them even as citizens into Israel, because the threat that a Palestinian state poses, as we saw on October 7th, is a threat to our very survival. It's an existential threat, because the sole organizing principle of Palestinian national ethos, as we've seen it expressed both in their internal discourse and in their treatment of Israel, is that they are defined solely by their desire to annihilate Israel. Aside from that, they have no edifying principles that define them as any sort of nation. They're a nation that was born in response to the establishment of the State of Israel and the building of the State of Israel in pre-war, in pre-state days, and that is what they have remained throughout. And so, since that is the case, as we saw again on October 7th, a Palestinian state that is established west of the Jordan River in the landmass that is the land of Israel will be an existential threat to Israel. And under those circumstances, it was my view in 2013 that naturalizing a large number of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria was a better option. And it's not that I disagree with my thoughts from the time, but intervening factors have played out in the meantime since I wrote the book, which are that the Israeli Arab community has been radicalized, and we've seen the rise of the Islamic movement even more powerfully than it had been in the past. We've seen the downfall or the disenfranchisement almost of Arab Israelis who are integrationists. And we've seen with the rise of ISIS and other forces in the Muslim world and the stabilization of Syria under Iranian hegemony, that that integrationist impulse that had been so marked a decade ago has been overcome by an irredentist Islamist impulse that's been racing through. So at this point, given that that's the state of Israeli Arabs, and it's even more the state of Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria, who have been given just an enormous amount of money and arms from Iran over the past many years, and have been further radicalized. I don't think that you can naturalize them, certainly not in my lifetime. And I think that over time, the best option is, I think, one that Ambassador Friedman lays out, but I'm going to leave it to him to explain. You know, we have this Palestinian Authority, which has to be dismantled because it's a terrorist authority, and it cannot be allowed to maintain legitimacy politically. Its only purpose as a political entity is to war against Israel, both on the warfare of the politics, the international arena in places like the UN and the United States, on U.S. college campuses, etc., and from a terrorist perspective on the ground in Israel. And so that has to be dismantled and delegitimized because it's a terrorist entity. And then allow, along the lines that Professor Kedar set out, local Arab leadership to take over and assert autonomous leadership of population centers in the major cities in Judea and Samaria. Regarding the governance of Gaza going forward, that I certainly wouldn't cast aside his offer of the sort of Emirate policy in the Gaza Strip. But again, you know, this has to be very clearly a truncated territory of Gaza after what they've done and what they're still doing, and that's basically how I see it. We have a long political battle ahead of us. We'll be in a much better position if President Trump is reelected in November than we will be if Kamala Harris becomes the next president. That's for sure, which is what leads me to be almost afraid to say what we need for victory, because the Americans are acting in such a hostile way right now towards Israel in so many different ways. And so it leads me to feel that I realistically have to curtail our aspirations. But over the long term, I think what we saw on October 7th has indicated clearly that even the discourse that we've had for the past generation of a Palestinian state, of a two-state solution, and so forth, they're no longer. It's not just that they're no longer relevant; it's that they're dangerous because they place us in a straitjacket intellectually and from a policy perspective that endangers Israel's existence, that empowers the worst forces both in the region and I dare say in the United States as well. It makes Jews very hard-pressed to defend themselves against anti-Semites because they have not had it explained to them that as the Palestinians see the world, this is a zero-sum game, and there can't be peaceful coexistence. And so supporting a Palestinian statehood essentially means supporting the annihilation of the Jews. And so, you know, we have to move beyond the discourse. It's extremely important that we move past it as quickly as possible, which is why webinars and discussions and forums like this are so important. But that also places us in a position where we're heading into a very large clash with the U.S. government if Kamala Harris wins the election in November. At any rate, we're going to have to deal with this one way or another, and we will. So those are my thoughts in a nutshell. And I'm sure that the ambassador, who just wrote a new book about this, will probably have much more to add to the discussion.
Thank you so much for that, Caroline. It's an honor to hear from you always. You know, you talk about how the whole conversation we've had for the last generation about the two-state solution, it became the axiomatic framework for how we think. And with so many things, you know, when we're stuck in a failing frame, it's so hard to have a vision for what comes afterwards. And that's really a perfect segue into our next panelist, to Ambassador David Friedman, who At this point, we're in an interesting situation where we have a presidential campaign where on both sides, basically, we have incumbents. We've seen President Trump in action, and we've seen this Biden-Harris administration in action. And we know from the Israel side what a blessing all the policies of the Trump administration were in terms of, and they were so out of the box. They broke down old paradigms. One of the paradigms was that there can never be peace between Israel and Muslim states without solving the Palestinian issue. And the Abraham Accords proved that wrong. The old framework of thinking was that if the United States recognized Jerusalem as the capital and moved the embassy there would be a war in the Middle East and the Arab world would explode. And of course, the opposite happened. The Abraham Accords happened afterwards. And a lot of that change in paradigm was the implementation of the vision and the leadership of Ambassador David Friedman. He's really a historic figure. He's someone that we're all fortunate to have among us right now, but he's someone who his vision, all those wonderful policies that we all loved from the Trump administration, the man on the ground really pushing them forward was Ambassador David Friedman. When months ago, back in February, when I spoke in my introduction about Keep God's Land, about this movement, this coalition of mostly Christian, but also many Jewish leaders that we put together to fight against the messaging of the push for a two-state solution. When we launched this movement at the launch event, Ambassador Friedman unveiled in public his plan, which eventually became the book that is now available, One Jewish State. We encourage everyone to buy this book. And at that event in Nashville, Tennessee, at the National Religious Broadcasters, when Ambassador Friedman unveiled his plan, I was just inspired because I saw this and I said, my whole life I've been against the two-state solution. But whenever people would ask me, okay, so what's your solution? It's hard to come up with something without without falling into things that are very unrealistic. And Ambassador Friedman's vision and guidance and wisdom has really laid the groundwork for something that hopefully will become the policy of the next Trump administration. Hopefully, become the policy of the people of Israel. And as I mentioned, our movement, One Jewish State, that we're going to be trying to seize the levers of power to whatever extent we can in the World Zionist Congress, and we're going to be working in tandem with Ambassador Friedman all along the way. It really came out of that vision, as I said. And I want to encourage everyone to buy Ambassador Friedman's book. And I already saw in the chat that many people were raising the question of wanting to host book launch events, book signing events for One Jewish State. Rabbi Weiss put in the chat a form that you could fill out. You could give your information for us, and we'll get it to the right place, and we'll pass it along to Ambassador Friedman and his people, and we'll work with you on having a book event for One Jewish State. Without further ado, after that long introduction, he doesn't need any more introduction. I'm going to turn the floor over to Ambassador Friedman. Ambassador Friedman, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Pesach. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining. And it's a great honor for me to share this podium with, as others have said, and I completely agree, two really, really important voices and two great minds in this field, Professor Kedar and Carolyn Glick. I was with Carolyn in my home talking about this stuff just, I think, 2 days ago, and I just landed in New York. And I before I talk about these things, just a word or two that I think just maybe to set the right tone. I want everybody to know that, I'm optimistic. I really am. I mean, a lot of bad things going on around the world and a lot of challenges that Israel faces, but I just spent 7 weeks in Israel, and I've just come back, and I'm optimistic. And I'll give you this example. One of the ways that you can gauge the health of a human being is whether they can get life insurance, right? That's sort of it's not touchy-feely. It's just data-driven. They have all kinds of algorithms and formulas to figure out whether they're going to write a policy on somebody. So ask yourself this: you got 2 people applying for life insurance, right? One guy has a virulent form of cancer, but he doesn't know about it. The other guy has a virulent form of cancer, and he's discovered it, and he's getting treatment. Now, if you're a life insurance company, which policy are you more likely to write, right? Who's the healthier of the two, right? Obviously, it's the guy who knows about it because he can address it, and maybe he can get cured. Doesn't mean he's necessarily fully healthy, but at least he's on the mend. Now, before October 7th, Israel had terminal cancer. I mean, it didn't know it. It had on its border an enemy, a ruthless. I mean, it knew the enemy was ruthless and knew the enemy was barbaric. Did it really know that the enemy had the capacity or the plan to this attack? I guess we'll find that out over the course of the next year. But an enemy with 350 miles of terror tunnels, some of which could take truckloads of materials, every house almost sitting on top of a tunnel, massive corridors between Gaza and Egypt in the Philadelphia corridor that could keep Gaza stocked with weapons for forever. I mean, there's massive risks that were unknown or certainly not taken seriously by the Israeli government. And now after October 7th, with all the pain and the difficulty and the, if you will, the chemotherapy that we're going through to try to get healthy again, we're a lot better off today than we were then. And that gives me some real cause for optimism, especially as I've seen, over the last, and this is my 5th trip since October 7th, but, let's just, understand that the people of Israel, I mean, we can criticize, the parties, the leadership, the politics, and I have no intention of doing that. But the people of Israel, the people that actually have stepped up to save and protect this great nation are extraordinary people. I mean, they are an incredible asset, the likes of which I don't know that any other country has. I mean, people, normally when there's a war, people are running out of the country. Here, all the planes, after the war, most of the planes were full coming in with soldiers who were, on break, and they all were flying in. Nobody was flying out. More people reported for reserve service than were called up. And since then, it's been like that every day. We see everyday acts of heroism. So, if I'm betting on, if I'm making a macro bet on a country, and I do some investing, so I do sometimes look at this stuff based on data. If I'm making a macro bet on a country around the world, I'm betting on Israel. I really am. I think Israel will solve their problems, and they will emerge stronger than ever. So that's, I know it's kind of hard to be optimistic now, but sometimes, as a guy who used to do distress investing and invest in companies when they were in bad shape and try to turn them around, you kind of spot opportunities. Israel is a screaming buy. If you're an investor, it's a screaming buy. If you want to move there, Israel, I think, has identified its problems and has developed clarity on issues that it has never had before. Now, will it act upon that clarity? I mean, hopefully people like Professor Kedar and Cowan and others can influence the government to go in the right direction. But I believe that we are trending in a different direction that is positive. I wish it didn't come at this price. I wish it didn't come with the loss of life, with the wounded, with the hostages. We wish they all should return. I wish none of those things happened. But we have discovered the illness within Israel's society, and at least some people, I think, are beginning to bring about a cure, which I think is very positive. The other thing I'd say is, look, we have learned this lesson over and over again, that vacuums in the Middle East get filled by bad actors. And Israel has paid this price over and over again. I mean, even with Egypt, which most people would say was a smart move, they left Sinai, and Sinai became filled up with pockets of ISIS. Under Oslo, Israel left areas, what's now called areas A and B. There's no Israelis going there. It's filled up with, Hamas and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and the worst of the PA. Obviously, Israel left Gaza. It was taken over by Hamas. As Carolyn mentioned, we left Lebanon. It was taken over by Hezbollah. We just, it's almost like, Charlie Brown in the football. We keep making this mistake over and over and over again. And I think this may be the last time. I think October 7th, hopefully, will bring about the last time that we make these mistakes. I say it in the book. It's almost like God, because I am a person of faith. It's almost like God is telling us, how many times do I have to tell you? I gave you this land, keep it. Stop giving it away. It's not going to work out when you give it away. Just keep it, hang on to it. Trust me, it's the best outcome. And I hope October 7th was the last time we have to learn that lesson. I really do. Look, I think ultimately Gaza is sort of a, what we would call maybe a lagging indicator for Judea and Samaria. I mean, Gaza is a mess right now. It's very hard to talk about the day after. It's not even clear what the day after is. What is the day that would constitute the day after? Because, the idea that will decide that Israel has won the war, doesn't mean that there aren't going to continue to be pockets of Hamas throughout the Gaza Strip. I mean, it's not like it's a binary win versus lose. I mean, we could find Sinwar and kill him. We could find all the hostages and free them. We'd feel good, and we'd feel like we'd achieved some cure for this illness. But it's not. I mean, they're still there. There's still pockets of Hamas there. So the question is, can we create another vacuum? And I think the answer is no. We can't create another vacuum. However we decide to fill that vacuum, at the very least, now I'm speaking about Gaza, and I'll move on to Judea and Samaria because it's a more mature problem. It isn't on the heels of this type of a war, but at the very least, the Israeli Defense Forces have to remain in Gaza. And I agree that the truth is, having the army without a population base, it also doesn't work. I mean, you can't just put an army into hostile territory and say, go keep the peace. I mean, there has to be Jewish settlement as well. Now, the problem is, if you say that right now, because the situation is so raw and difficult, and because we have the Biden administration, it's best left finessed in the short run. But I don't think the same is true for Judea and Samaria, which is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because of three things. I wrote the book because of October 7th. I wrote the book because in the aftermath of October 7th, 82% of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria indicated that they approved. In fact, that they endorsed and embraced the assault by Hamas on October 7th. And the last point was that in the aftermath of this, the Biden-Harris administration was saying the way you really got to fix this is a two-state solution. When I heard all this, when that last piece came to me, I said, all right, I got to stop what I'm doing. I locked myself in my office for 10 weeks. And I wrote the book. And the upshot of the book, kind of the punchline, if you will, is that if you think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and lots of people do, and lots of people have written about it, and lots of people are experts on it. In many respects, people have devoted far more of their lives to this issue than I have. But I say there's sort of five vectors that drive people's views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One, of course, is national security. One is faith. One is people's interest in human rights. One is economics and creating more prosperity. And one is geopolitics, creating a more regional stability within the area. So those are kind of five vectors. Now, people prioritize them in different ways, and they look at them in different ways. And sometimes the way people prioritize them drives their view about a solution. Well, guess what? Since October 7th, my thesis is that every one of those vectors is heading in the identical direction. This is the first time in our lifetimes that every single one of these issues resolves itself in favor of one Jewish state, in favor of Israeli sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a demonstrated ability to empower an Arab minority population. Now, look, the Arab population in Israel, you can say the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. I'm optimistic. I mean, in my book I point out some statistics that 20% of Israel is Arab, and more than 20% of Haifa University, Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, the Technion, and Beersheba University is Arab. I mean, the Arabs are well integrated into the universities, which of course is the launch pad for success in Israeli society. You go into a pharmacy in Israel, it's almost 100% probability you're going to deal with a Palestinian. You go to the emergency room at Hadassah Hospital, good chance you'll get a Palestinian doctor. One of my closest friends in Israel is the former chairman of Bank Leumi. He's an Arab Muslim who was the chairman of Israel's largest bank. I think that Israel doesn't try to get enough credit for it and doesn't get enough credit for it. And I can tell you, when I was in government, we played some games. We went to the Triangle area, Fahim and Bak el Garbi. I met with some people there, and I said to them, "Hey guys, you're 100% Arab. Your communities. You have a lot of complaints about the Israeli government. We're kind of tinkering around now with various options. What if we just redraw the green line, and we'll put all your towns on the other. You're right up against the green line. Why don't we redraw the green line, and we'll take you outside of the state of Israel, and you'll be within this Palestinian territory. So if you get a Palestinian state, you won the lottery. You're part of Palestine. Is that what you want? They thought I had three heads. I mean, their view is, are you crazy? We never want to be part of any state of Palestine. It'll be a disaster. It'll be corrupt. It will fail. And it will, as Dr. Kedar said, it'll be a failed state. Of course, it'll be a platform for a terrorist state as well. So look, I think Israel has the ability to export something very special into the Palestinian neighborhoods. The question that everybody asks is, well, are we going to let 2.5 million people vote in a national election? The answer is no. The answer is absolutely not. Whether they need to be, considered clans or cantons or emirates or cities. I mean, we can, those to me are details we don't need to really resolve right now. But what I say is, look, the United States has sovereign territory in Puerto Rico and Guam, American Samoa. I mean, that's sovereign U.S. soil. The people that live there are citizens of the United States. They don't vote in our national elections, right? Nobody calls America an apartheid state. So there are different ways to skin this cat. And if you want to solve the problem, we can solve the problem. But at the end of the day, I think that whether you're someone of faith who says, look, God gave this land to the Jewish people, and we can't give it away. And don't underestimate the number of people who think that, especially within the Christian world. But I can tell you, I'm Jewish and I feel that way. Whether you're somebody who says, look, we have to create a national security regime that will last for 100 years. Well, Jewish settlement in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza with the Israeli army creating a security umbrella, I think is the way to do it. Whether you care about, human rights, about religious freedom. I mean, Israel's the only country in the region that can create a system of human rights, religious freedom. Economics, Israel's GDP per capita is about 55,000. Every one of its neighbors, the GDP per capita is around 6,000. So, I mean, who should be in charge of this? It's got to be Israel. There's nobody but Israel. And here's the most important thing, and I'll leave you with this point. People say to me, well, what should America do? And I'm going to tell you, just to, kind of put a finer point on this. If I said to President Trump tomorrow, I think it would be a great idea for Israel to assert its sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, his response to me would be, well, what do the Israelis want to do? Okay. And right now, my answer to him is, I don't know, and I don't think they're up to it right now. So the biggest issue to me right now is trying to have a national consensus developed on this issue. It's really important. And I'm not talking about getting, 61 or 62 seats in the Knesset and pushing it through. I mean, that's one way to do it. I think it's the wrong way. I'm optimistic, and I have strong relationship with secular Israelis who range from being agnostic to atheists. But you know what? They're Jewish people, and they're great patriots, and they love the country, and they fight for the country, and they have distinguished military careers. And when I tell them, which they don't really know, when I tell them about the incredible legacy and majesty of Judea and Samaria, and it's important to the Jewish people, after about 10 minutes, they tell me we don't want to give it away. We can't give it away. It's like America giving away the Washington Monument or the Statue of Liberty. I think it's an easy sell to make, but it's not being done. I mean, the conversation I had, I wish I could have it 1 million times. I can't, I don't have time to do it 1 million times, which is why I wrote the book. But I believe that, with a proper conversation, with respect, with love, with the right format, Israel can be empowered to desire its sovereignty over its great biblical, majestic legacy. I think that's better for Israel. I think it's better for the Palestinians. I think it's better for the region. And that's why I say one Jewish state, doesn't matter whether you're right or left, whether you're religious or secular, whether you are pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel, it's the right outcome for everybody living there. Israel is the only country with the capacity, the skill, the know-how, the wherewithal, and the will to turn all of biblical Israel into a place of peace and prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Friedman. And as the need for this conversation, this national conversation in Israel, it really underlies the importance of what we're doing, taking the one Jewish state idea and turning it into an actual movement to actually move this into the discourse of Jewish life, of Israeli life, so we could start having a seat at the tables and making it clear that this is the right direction to go in for the future. Before we just take one question, that's about what we have time for. One more house cleaning. If you're enjoying this conversation and if you're passionate about preventing Palestinian statehood, please, first of all, go to onejstate.com and sign up to be a delegate with One Jewish State. Learn more about this movement, about what we're doing. But also join us on September 15th in New York City at the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. We're partnering with that organization in this major event. Ambassador David Friedman, myself, Rabbi Tuli Weiss, numerous members of Knesset and ministers in the Israeli government are going to be there, ambassadors, pastors, and rabbis, and other leaders of the Keep God's Land movement will all be there. And we invite you all to join us. We're also having an exclusive VIP dinner reception with Ambassador Friedman, followed by an amazing concert celebrating Israel. That's Sunday, September 15th at the Marriott Marquis in Times Square in New York. And you could sign up at JPBNY, so Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, New York. That abbreviation, jpbny.org. And you can sign up there. Now, Josh Wander, who's a delegate for One Jewish State and a good friend of ours, asked a question for the panelists. I don't know if Dr. Kedar was able to remain. I know he had a media hit he had to get to, but for Ambassador Friedman and Caroline, if you're here, what do you feel about the recent developments on the Temple Mount and the things that are going on there, or just in the bigger picture? How do you see the Temple Mount issue being resolved in the context of your vision for the future? Maybe we'll go to Caroline first.
I think that the Temple Mount, the situation on the Temple Mount is indicative of the basic pathologies that we're living with right now, where you have draconian limits being placed on Jewish and Christian worship in Judaism's most holy, some would argue only holy site, the Temple Mount, and you have total freedom of worship and riot for the Muslims on the Temple Mount. And I think it's a function of the larger pathology, which is that we haven't been able to win. We haven't been able to defeat the forces inside of the Islamic world, particularly here, in the land of Israel, that view their war against Israel as a jihad, view the Temple Mount, which was not a particularly holy place to Islam until the Zionist movement began establishing the State of Israel, or even after the state was founded, or even after, really, it wasn't until 1967 when Israel established its sovereignty over the Temple Mount and over unified Jerusalem. And yet, we're not willing to contend with the fact that this is a jihad. Our leadership, particularly our military leadership and our intelligence leadership, doesn't want to contend with that reality. And as a result, you see lots of different policies that are enacted in order to try to pretend it away. That's, of course, what also happened with Gaza before October 7th. There was this idea that you could pay off the Hamas. The jihadists didn't mean it when they recited Quranic verses calling for the annihilation of the Jews and the enslavement of our women, etc. They didn't want to believe that it was serious, and they thought that, for a mere $30 million a month from Qatar and some work permits for Gazans inside of the kibbutzim bordering Gaza, that everything would be fine. So I think we see where this denial of the jihadist nature of our enemies' aspirations has done to us. And I think the Temple Mount is a product of it. Do I think that this is the first thing that's going to be remedied? No, I doubt it. But it's certainly a function of that larger problem.
Thank you, Caroline. Ambassador, do you have thoughts on the Temple Mount in this context?
Yeah, I agree completely with what Caroline said. What I would add is that look, this has to be addressed on a much higher level than it's being addressed now. What bothers me, no end, is this kind of cat and mouse game around the Temple Mount that that politicians play because they have no choice, because there can't be a discussion about it, because at the highest levels there's this notion of a status quo that frankly no one really knows what the status quo is. If you look at, if you try to find out a definition agreed to for status quo, you won't find it. So it means different things to different people. But because it's not addressed like a mature country should address an issue of this nature, you have politicians like Itamar Ben-Gvir going up there, and then all of a sudden, what it becomes to the world is an extremist, doing something provocative, when all he's really doing is exercising a right of religious freedom that we would uphold anywhere else in the world. And by the way, I would just point out, look, we wrote a plan when we were in government, a peace plan that I'm not pushing at all. But one point, someone could read it, they would say, it says there, what we wrote in the Trump administration about Jerusalem is that it should be open to all faiths. And frankly, that was the wisdom, that was the view of King Solomon as well, right? He said, Ki beiti beit tefillah, yikarei l'chol ha'amim, right? That all the nations of the world should have the right to come to the Temple Mount, obviously not prayed in the same way as Jews. But the Temple Mount has the potential to be the center, it should be the center of the world for the Jewish people and all the world. And the idea that the Jews are, that it's become kind of Judenrein is horrible, but it's all because of failed policies that have gone back for years. And it'll take some work to undo it. But I think it is certainly part of the, if you will, the one Jewish state platform. If we're going to have one Jewish state over the land of Israel, we're certainly going to have one Jewish state over the holiest place within that state.
If I may add another point here.
Oh, Dr. Kedar is still here. I didn't know you were still here. Wonderful.
I'm sorry, and I have to run. I'm running. Excuse me.
Ambassador Friedman, thank you for joining us. Dr. Kedar, last word for you.
We have to understand the Islamic mindset when it comes to the Temple Mount. According to very significant Islamic approach, Judaism is null and void. Din batil, as they say in Arabic, because Islam came to the world to replace, the theory of replacement, to replace both Judaism and Christianity. Therefore, Judaism is null and void, just like Christianity, according to Islam, and only Islam is din haq, means religion of truth. The establishing of the state of Israel, the returning of Jews to their homeland, the establishing of the state, the liberation of Jerusalem, and the pinnacle is the prayer of Jews on Temple Mount, in their mind actually resembles the returning of Judaism to life, the resurrection of Judaism. This is what Muslims think, that this is a deed of a Satan, because Judaism should be null and void after Islam came to the world. And for them, the fact that Jews are praying on the Temple Mount, it creates a theologic challenge which they cannot fathom. They cannot take it, because Judaism is back in life. And this is why they object so wholeheartedly the will of Jews to pray on the Temple Mount. Now the question is, what do we do with this? Do we succumb to their beliefs that Judaism is null and void? Or we tell them, hey guys, we are back to our land, we are back to our sovereignty, we are back to our being a Jewish state, and yes, we are back to our Temple Mount. We are not destroying any mosque, we are not willing to hurt anything, yet it's time that you honor us, it's time that you accept us, because we are not dhimmis anymore, means people who live under the yoke of Islam. We are free nation. We came back to our forefathers' land in order to stay here forever. And the proof is that we are praying on the Temple Mount, whether you like it or not. Whenever people in the Middle East face an iron wall, they retrieve. And this is what they should meet when it comes to prayer on the Temple Mount. Look, I'm not coming, when in the Ramadan, if they, they're coming in hundreds of thousands, okay, in Ramadan, take the place. In condition that on Yom Kippur, the place is ours. For example, things like this. We have to be creative, we have to be kind, we have to be decisive, clear, and determined to keep to our rights. And in order to implement it, we have to fire the Supreme Court from the job which it took to itself to run the country, to run its relations with its neighbors and its enemies alike. Thank you so much.
Dr. Kedar, that's a wonderful message to end this webinar. We are back, and it's time that the Jewish people fully realize that the exile is over, and that's part of the ethos of what we're creating also at One Jewish State, and the attitude that we're going to bring into the World Jewish Congress, which is that we are no longer Jews of the exile who are willing to compromise on who we are and compromise on our land and compromise our identity. And I'll also add, Dr. Kedar, that the greatest proof that they think this way about the Temple Mount is that the name for this war that our enemies use is Al-Aqsa flood. Even though October 7th took place in the communities surrounding the Gaza Strip, our enemies refer to this battle as Al-Aqsa flood. Al-Aqsa is, of course, their name for the Temple Mount. They know what they're fighting for. They know that they're fighting over the Temple Mount and what it represents and the narrative about it. And I think it's important for Jews to recognize what war we are actually fighting. Thank you so much, Dr. Kedar, for those wonderful words. It's a great way to end the webinar. And thank you to all of you for participating. And once again, we've thrown a lot of information at you. We've had wonderful panelists. I can't imagine a better panel for this discussion, but please join our movement. Please check out onejstate.com. Please check out keepgodsland.com and Israel 365 and everything that we're doing here. And we will be having more webinars very soon in the future. We'll keep these conversations going. And God bless you all. Thank you once again for joining us.